John 17:17 says God's word is truth. Not the truth, it is truth. So truth is whatever God says.
We've been talking about entering into his rest. And we saw in Hebrews chapter 3 and 4, actually 1, 2, 3, and 4, that the rest that he's talking about there is the completed work, that it refers to that God rested on the seventh day from the process of creation. And we saw that he didn't rest because he was tired, so the rest that the Bible's talking about is not a rest because we're worn out. And obviously we live in human bodies and we have human souls, and our souls and our bodies can get tired, and we do need to provide rest for our bodies and rest for our souls. It's not a sin to rest. We live in a culture that almost treats it as a sin if we don't burn out. But Jesus rested. The first time he sent his disciples out to minister, when they came back, he took them aside so that they could rest. So Jesus had seasons of ministry, seasons of rest. And so again, we live in a culture that sometimes thinks of rest as some kind of, you're lazy, and if you don't just go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And now in our society, that's not hard to do because information and people have access to us. I mean, there were people able to get a hold of us in the Dominican. If you allow it, people will have access to you, whether it's for your work or family, wherever you go, 24 hours a day. If I don't turn my phone down or off, it goes bing in the middle of the night. Somebody sent a message or something like that, or some telemarketer sent a message. So my point is, we have to intentionally set aside rest, and it's very important. But the rest that the Bible's talking about in Hebrews isn't a physical rest, although we need that. It is the rest that God, we said, labor to enter into his rest. His rest was he stopped because the work was done. On the seventh day, the work was done, so he rested from his work because there was no more work to do. And what we saw is the rest that we are to enter into as Christians is to enter into the completed work that Jesus did on the cross. When Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished," then the work for our salvation, the work to cleanse us, as she just sang about the blood cleansing us, that work has been done. And where we have to labor is to enter into that, because every instinct in us is to still work to get something that's already been purchased for us. And so the rest is to rest from our own striving, to measure up. Yes, we need to be good. We need to learn to grow in mature in the gifts of the gifts too, but in the fruit of the Spirit. But we're not doing that so that we're accepted by God. We're not doing that so that God loves us. We're not doing that so that we have an entrance into heaven. That's all done by the cross and only by the cross. And so we need to enter into that rest. When you're weary, when you're heavy laden, when you're burdened down, when you're discouraged, when you're just dragging yourself out of bed in the morning, when you're at that place, the beginning of the answer is to come to me. Don't call your relatives, don't call your friends, don't call other people to ask. Come to me for the answer. Come to me, and I will give you rest. You understand, no person can give you rest. Not this kind of rest. Because I've been in that place where I've gotten down or discouraged, and I'll call some pastor or talk to somebody, and they'll, you're in the will of God. I know you're doing this. And I said, I really appreciate that, but the only way I can have that peace is I know that from God. I appreciate your ideas, I appreciate your insight, but it's only how he sees me that gives me the peace and the rest. And so that rest can only come from him. That peace can only come from him, but in order for it to come from him, you've got to come to him, just as you are. But isn't that what you did in the beginning? Isn't that what we did at the beginning? We came to him just as we are. There's an old expression I heard years ago as part of an altar call, when someone was giving an altar call, and they said, look, if you think that you're too dirty to come to Jesus and get saved, that's like the person that says, look, before I take a bath, I better take a shower because I'm too dirty to take a bath. Jesus cleanses. He cleanses us. That's what that beautiful song we heard earlier. His blood cleanses us, not just from the sin, but from the guilt and the shame of that sin. And that blood still flows even 35 years after I got saved. One of my favorite scriptures in Hebrews 4:16 is, come boldly. That means with confidence to the throne of grace to find mercy and help in time of need. He's talking to Christians. When you stumble, when you fall, when you make a mistake, when you sin, don't run away from him. Run to him. Because there is no help, there is no peace, there is no forgiveness running away from him. It's running to him. Come to me. Come to me. That's getting on your knees, that's opening your heart, and that's getting honest and real with him. This is where I am. You know, he won't be shocked when you tell him where you are. When you confess your sin to him is not when he finds out about it. When you tell him, look, I'm at the bottom of the barrel, I'm ready to quit, he's not going, oh, I never knew you'd ever get there. He just needs us to be honest with him, to put away the pretense and be honest with him. Come to me. All. No exceptions. Doesn't matter how you got there. It doesn't matter where you are. Come to me, all you. Not just the pastors, not just the Sunday school teachers. Come to me, all that labor, are weary, and are heavy laden. And let's see what else he tells us to do here. And I will give you rest. The only rest that is truly restful is the rest that he gives us. The only rest that truly gives us peace is the rest and the peace that he gives us. And I will give you rest. Notice there's no conditions there except we come. He's not saying, look, I will consider your case and analyze it and evaluate it and decide what I'm going to give you. He tells us what he will give us if we will come to him. We don't have to guess. If I come to Jesus in this state, if I come to Jesus when I'm so down and discouraged, if I come to Jesus when I fail, when I come to Jesus, I don't know what he's going to do. He tells us what he's going to do. And he doesn't lie. One of my favorite scriptures is in Numbers 23:19. God is not a man that he should lie, nor the son of a man that he should change his mind. Has he not said it, and shall he not give it? Shall he not bring it about? Jesus promises you that if you will come to him in that state, if you will come to him, he will give you rest. But then he tells us how to receive the rest. Take my yoke upon you, which is the burden or the responsibility. Many times we get worn out and burdened and burned out because we put on ourselves a yoke or a burden he didn't put on us. Take my yoke, which is the one I have for you. Take my yoke upon you. That's the first thing he tells us to do. So that may mean you've got to take the yoke, the responsibility, the pressure, the obligations that you have put on yourself, or with the devil's help, and lay it aside. And find out what yoke he has for you. My wife and I were talking about this yesterday. They just get so in life, you just begin to feel. Now, there's some people that don't feel responsible for anything. That's called irresponsible. But most of us are not like that. We feel responsible for things that God hasn't given us responsibility for. Because our culture, our society, our family just communicated to you, you're responsible for this and you're responsible for this. I mean, one of the things I'm having to renew my mind to is I was raised in a family where you were expected to eat everything on your plate. And many of you in the generation were expected to, my mother was an excellent cook, and there were 5 boys, and you had to clean your plate, because if you didn't clean your plate, there was something wrong, either with the food, which you didn't want to say, or, my mother had a way of pulling her glasses down and looking at you, and you ate that food. Well, I've discovered you don't have to eat everything on your plate, because I sometimes at a restaurant, and they've given me far more than I need to eat, but there's something compelling in me, I need to finish that. And I finally realized this because I was raised to feel a responsibility to eat everything on my plate. And I go back and reevaluate that. Is that true? And that's just a small example of it. But in life, we pick up responsibility for people, responsibility, and many of us come from families that are one degree or other dysfunctional, which means that we have people in our family place obligations on us. They use guilt to manage the family. Guilt to motivate people to do things that love is what's supposed to motivate it. And so we manipulate one another to getting them to do what we want to know. And what manipulation is I'm making you feel responsible for something I'm responsible for. I can't tell you the times I've had to minister to, and other staff members have too, to a situation where you have one or more spouse that's addicted to something. And whenever that's happened, you always have 2 sides to that. You have the one that's addicted, and you have the one that's enabling them to be addictive, because it's a game that's being played back and forth, kind of like a dance. You cannot dance together. My wife and I cannot ballroom dance if one of us refuses to move with the other. It takes 2 to tango is the expression, and I guess that fits, doesn't it? I guess that's where that expression comes from. And so in order for that to survive, in order for these kinds of things to work in families, and it's not just addiction, it can be true in all kinds of areas, we have to, this is not the direction I was thinking I was going to go in today, we have to learn to not accept burdens that God didn't put on us. Now the other side of that is sometimes we don't pick up burdens He did. The most famous one is you have the Pharisee that said, am I my brother's keeper? I'm not responsible for my brother. And Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan as an example of we're all a brother's keeper to some degree, all right? So the point is this. We put our burdens on ourselves, and other people put burdens on us that Jesus didn't give us. And when we're weighed down by those, we don't have the energy and the time to carry the burdens that He did give us. Notice He didn't say, you're supposed to live life without any yoke. He said, take my yoke upon you. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. But here's the key, and this is where we're headed. It says, take my yoke, verse 29, take my yoke upon you. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, learn from me. And this is the part I think we so often miss. And when I used to teach this is the part I missed. I just didn't see it. He's saying, there's something I want you to learn from me, and if you'll learn it from me, you'll enter into the rest that I enter into. Jesus wasn't stressed out. And if there's anybody that had an opportunity to get stressed out, it was Jesus. I mean, think about it. He knows that the only reason He's here is to die. Not just die, but die a hideous, painful, shameful death on a cross. That's His end goal. God's given Him a staff that doesn't understand why He's here, don't get His messages continually, has infighting among it as to who's going to sit on His right and left in the kingdom. It wasn't just James and John. The rest of them got upset. We'll look at that later on. They didn't understand His heart. And when the ultimate crisis of His life came, they disappeared. And that was His staff. One of them is a traitor, and that's His treasurer. Then you've got the next larger group of disciples, a larger group of 70, and they disappear when He starts teaching tough things. And then there's a large group that just comes and goes for food. Let alone the Pharisees and the Sadducees who were always opposing Him, and His own family that didn't understand Him. Now, that's an opportunity to get discouraged. And we forget sometimes Jesus was human too. And you can hear it in some of the words. When everybody else leaves him and he turns and looks at the 12, he says to them, "Are you going to leave also?" I don't believe that was just a statement of theology. I believe there was emotion. Are you going to leave me also? He wept at Lazarus' tomb, not for Lazarus because he knew he was going to raise him from the dead. He wept for Mary and Martha because he saw and was touched with the pain they were going through, even knowing that in a few minutes he was going to bring their brother back to them. He would get frustrated with his disciples. How long do I have to put up with this generation of unbelief? Oh, ye of little faith. There was emotion in that. He was human as well as God. And he says to them at the end, "My peace I give you." My peace. Not the peace the world gives you, but my peace. Come and learn from me. So there's something about him. He says, if you learn from me, you learn what I'm like, who I am, what my character and nature's like, it will bring you rest. It will bring you rest. Now turn with me to John chapter 13. This is where we were last time. Verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. That means to the limit as well as to the end of time. And supper being ended, and actually that means supper being served, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that his Father had given all things into his hands, and that he come from the Father and was going to God, rose from supper, laid aside his garment, took a towel and girded himself, and after that he poured water in a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Now, but it's been 3 weeks since we went over this. So I'm going to briefly remind you of what's happening here, the significance of this. In those days, most of the roads weren't paved, and the ones that were paved were dusty and dirty. And people wore sandals that were open. And so the custom was, as you came into someone's house that was of any wealth, that they would have a servant, they would have servants, and the lowest servant, the most menial servant, was assigned the job of coming to the guest that came into the house. And while that guest was being greeted by somebody, the servant took the sandals off your feet, and there was a basin of water, and there was a towel there, and they would take the water from the basin and wash your feet, and then dry your feet from a towel, and either clean your sandals and put them back on or give you something else to wear. It was to refresh you. And it was so menial, it was so common that most likely, as you were having conversation with your host or whoever greeted you, you didn't even realize that this was going on. It was just they were washing your feet because it was so low, so menial, you didn't even pay attention to it. Well, this room where they're having this Last Supper together is a rented room. It's not, there's no host. And so the landlord, because it was the custom, had provided a basin, water, and a towel so that they could wash their own feet. But they come in as Jesus' disciples because they were with the Master. They were with the Lord. They were in a privileged position. And it says they were seated at the table. And understand the tables that they sat at were not like your dining room table or my dining room. You didn't sit at a chair and your legs went right under the table and your hands here. They were about that far off the floor. And so you either reclined on a pillow or some kind of chair with your feet extended out, which means my feet were extended into your face. The point is they all knew their feet hadn't been washed. But the significance here is they all knew this, but nobody did it. They were disciples of Jesus. They were the ones that had been used to hand out the bread when Jesus fed the 5,000 and to hand out the bread when he fed the 4,000. They were the ones that were used when he sent out, and they laid hands on the sick and they recovered, and they raised the dead and they cast out demons. Jesus used them for ministry, and powerful things happened through them. So they were the second level down. They were the next level down after Jesus. So they didn't do these kind of things. That was for a servant to do. And this says, at some point in the meal, Jesus gets up and he goes over to the basin of water. We don't know if it's on a table or on the floor. And he takes off his outer robe and he lays it aside. And he picks up the covering, the towel of the lowest slave, and he wraps himself in the towel of a slave. And he comes to them, and he gets down with the basin of water, and he begins to wash their feet. Powerful lesson. But the thing I'd never seen before, and we mentioned it last time, is look what happens when he comes to Peter. Verse 6. He came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? In the Greek, it says this, Lord, you my feet wash. The emphasis is this. Jesus is saying to him, you're going to wash my feet? Peter's mind couldn't get wrapped around that, because Peter understood more than anybody who he was. Peter's the one that God had given the revelation to when Jesus said, who do people say that I am? And they said, well, some say you're Elijah, some say you're a great prophet. Who do you say that I am? And Peter says to Jesus, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, flesh and blood didn't tell you that, but my Father in heaven revealed. Peter had a revelation of who Jesus was, that he's the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, the Son of God here in the flesh. Peter had that revelation of who he was, but he didn't have a revelation of what he was like. Many of us have a revelation of who he is, but we don't have a revelation of what he's like. And because of that, here's Peter's attitude. I'm not worthy for you to wash my feet. You have this backwards. Because of who you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. I should be washing your feet. That would feel right. That would satisfy me to have an opportunity to wash your feet because of who you are. And Jesus says to him, if I don't wash your feet, you have no place with me. And actually before that, Peter says, no, you can't wash my feet. That's when Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, you have no place with me. What's Jesus saying to him here? What's he getting at with Peter? The interesting thing, and I've shared this several times before, but I still keep going over it myself because it's so profound. Again, there's two disciples that are emphasized. There's Peter. And Peter's confidence was in his commitment to the Lord. See, your confidence, you may not be confident in your commitment to the Lord, but what you may be trying to do is to become more committed. You're trying to become more committed. And we should be committed, but our commitment is a response to seeing who he is, not because we've developed that commitment ourselves. Because then we're coming to the place where either we're confident in our relationship with him because we're confident in our commitment, or we have discouraged in our relationship because we're not confident in our commitment. In either event, it's based on my commitment. Then there was John. And John referred to himself not as the disciple who loved Jesus, But John referred to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Isn't it interesting? When the crisis came, when their leader, when the one they'd given up everything to follow is nailed to a cross, Peter's long gone. He was the first to cave in. The one that was confident in his commitment to Christ was the first to cave in. The only one who stood with him through it all, the one who was at the foot of the cross, was the man whose confidence was in how much Jesus loved him. And Jesus says to Peter, unless you allow me to love you and to serve you and to minister to you and to clean you up, you will never be able to come to me because you'll be out there on your own. And we may start out knowing that, but somehow in church we get going and the culture of the world has gotten into the culture of the church. Ambition, drive, but we turn it into spiritual ambition and spiritual drive. And we get worn out and we get weary. And Jesus says, when you do that, come to me, because something's gotten off. Learn what I'm like, because this is what I'm like, he's saying. Because what we're going to see then is then he tells them to go do that for one another. But you can't do it for one another if you haven't let him do it to you first.